hello. I hope you all can see me and hear me. How are you? Come on in, come on in. Say hi as you're coming in. Hey, Brown Fox, love you. Hey, Faith. Thank you, thank you. Hey, y'all. Say hey as you're coming in. Happy Tuesday. Happy Roommate Day. Hey, y'all. Hey, brother. Hello, hello. Happy Tuesday. It's Roommates Day. Yes. Super excited. All right. Just pulling us up online. Come on in. Come on in. Yes. It is Tuesday. Y'all there? All right. Hey, y'all. Come on in. Come on in. We got some good stuff to talk about today. Yes, we do. Oh, yes, we do. All right. Hey. Hey, Rashawn. Hey, Bo. Hey, Sister Kim. Hey, y'all. Let me get this laptop in front of me so I can be sitting here doing this with y'all. Hey. What's up, what's up, what's up? All right, we're going to be getting started. We ain't waiting on nobody, right? 7:30 on the dot. All right. Happy Tuesday. Happy Tuesday. So, we've made it to episode 4, y'all. And it feels so good because I promise you, I just couldn't, I couldn't do this without you all. Just all of the support that have been pouring out. Hey, Danny. That's my girl there. Hey, Danny. Welcome back. Yes. The support has been so real, y'all. And I'm not going to not ever acknowledge that because you all could be anywhere in the world right now, but you are being intentional and you are choosing to be here with me. So we're going to jump in because we got a list of things that we're going to talk about today, right? So, like I said, we've done it again, right? We are gathered here as roommates, and this is our 4th episode, right? Last week, you all showed up and showed out in an amazing, amazing turnout. Hey, Flawless, I see you. Hey, Athelia. Hey, Tanya. You all showed up in such a major way last week, right? Your interactive feedback via the comments and all of the shares that you've done just really, really got us in such a good spot. So kudos to you and all of the work that you guys are doing here with me, number 1. And then number 2, just your dedication to coming back and showing up is something that I do not take lightly. So before we get started, I want to give us some roommate news. I always want to do that because we are really just really showing out in a number of ways. So episode 3, right, where we talked about navigating healthy and unhealthy boundaries. Well, we have received over 2,000 views across all platforms. So y'all got to clap it up for yourselves because I've mentioned before, we don't worry about the live numbers. We worry about the overall numbers. You know, someone asked me the other day while I was out doing a social event regarding Rumor Has It, someone asked me, like, what is your goal? What is your plan for this platform? Thank you. What is your goal and what is your plan for this platform. And before I knew it, I said to go global. We have the force behind us and with our roommates. We have the content, which is clinically based and really based around healing. We have just the effort that is put forward. And I mean, we doing what we need to do. So for me to say to go global, that's light for us, because we are more than able. We are doing it already, and we will continue to do the things that we need to do. Hey, Brandy. Hey, Angie. Hello, Black. Love you. So episode 3, we got over 2,000 views, right? And then speaking of streaming, I want to keep you guys updated that come officially September 28th, we will be able to go live on our Rumor Has It Facebook page. So yes, right now we're utilizing my personal page, which is Tamika Watson. But once we reach that platform where we need to be, we will start going there. And that official date is going to be September 28th. So I do want to prepare you guys for that as we continue to navigate this whole thing. And then our YouTube subscriptions, though we are not at the required number to go live, I have full faith that we will eventually go live on that platform as well. But we have more subscribers today than we had last week. So again, that's something to clap up about, okay? Hey, Dolores Bailey, I love you. And then on last Saturday, we had the privilege to have a table and to host an EXT Day. That is that was a very near and dear invitation for me, because for those of you who know, you know, and for those of you who don't, the Extensions is where I grew up at, and for my sister to invite Rumor Has It to be there. Hey, y'all. I see y'all. Hey, Lucia. Thank you for joining. So it was such a privilege to be able to be at home, right? Anything Extensions is at home for me. And I spent, the first 20 odd years or more of my life there. So I was super excited. So we got so much support. People did purchase a lot of the Rumor Has It branding gear, the hats, the tumblers, the fans. So we got the opportunity to have people to pour into our platform. So for that, I am forever grateful, right? And with that, right, with the EXT Day, we had the privilege of taking to the streets. Hey, Samantha. We had the privilege of taking to the streets to get people feedback about our beautiful logo picture, right? These beautiful young ladies that you see behind me. And I just wanted to share with you all some of the feedback we got about what do you see when you look at this picture? So for those of you who are chimed in, I would love for you to take a look at this picture and drop in the chat what you see in this picture if you didn't get a chance to do it on Saturday. But in the meantime, I'm going to read to you all some of the feedback that we got that was so heartwarming for me, right? So we heard things like, it looks like a daughter telling her mom a secret that she needs to release. And every parent needs to accept the secrets of their children. That's good. That's deep, right? Because we should. We also heard that the photo simply looks like a friend whispering something to another friend. We also heard someone say that something is being told in confidence, but not necessarily a rumor. And just because something is being put in your ear, it does not mean that it's negative, derogatory, or anything towards anyone. So I'm like, yes, that is amazing, because it's your perception, right? And that was some of the ladies that tuned in. But let me tell you what some of the guys said. We had someone to say, it's 4 simple words. When I look at this picture, it's 4 simple words, and it's let's talk about it. This does give kind of a let's talk about it vibe, right? But finally, someone said something that, again, all of these things were so amazing, and it's such great feedback. But we also heard a gentleman say that he sees 2 beautiful Black young ladies, and one is whispering in the other's ear saying, never to give up. So I love that. And before I tell you guys what was my vision when I wanted the logo created, I'll just read a couple from the chat that you guys just dropped in. So someone is saying that this picture is a sister being a sister, and she's transferring information onto someone else. I see someone else saying that it's sister love and trust. Sisterhood is another thing that I see. That's off Facebook. Instagram, I don't know that I see you guys saying anything yet, but by all means, chime in, right? When God planted this concept on me late last year, 2023. If you guys have been following me from episode 1, then you've heard me say that. But when I got into the branding and the logo part of things, I was like, okay, it's certain things I really want my logo picture to depict, right? So when I was working with our graphic designer, and his name is Greg, and if you go back to some of the earlier pictures, you will see that I added him on, I gave a shout out to him and gave him his credit, right? And I was very specific about my request when it came to the 2 ladies. I always knew that I wanted somebody to be whispering in somebody's ear, because we have that play on words with rumor, right? And rumors are generally whispered. They're not boisterous, right? People just continue to throw things out that that don't necessarily suit. It can be tricky, right, when it comes to whispering and rumors and stuff like that. But it was 2 things that I was very specific about, and that it took almost 5 weeks to agree on this beautiful logo picture. And the one thing was that it was 3 things. The one thing is that I wanted it to depict somebody whispering in someone's ear. And I did want it to be 2 ladies. But I also wanted the facial expression of the person that is facing us, that is being whispered into the ear. I wanted her to have an expression as if she was, 1, listening, and 2, there was no type of expression on her face to resemble judgment. So, how do we do? Did we do okay? I think we did okay. Look at her face. I wish I could do that thing where we can zoom in on her face. But, in due time, we'll have all of the theatricals. But, those were some of the things, and I'm thankful for what we came up with. If you guys go to all of the pages, I've recently updated the color scheme of the photo, so it is no longer pink and green. Got a lot of questions like, are you an AKA? And though I love the Greeks, I am not of AKA. And so I thought that we will bring it to more of the color scheme that I wanted, which was purple for royalty and green for wealth, right? And green is any color, any shade of green is my favorite. So with that being said, guys, that was, that was my vision for the logo. All right. So before we jump into today's topic, I want to do 2 things. I want to give us our words of affirmation for this week. And then I also want to give you all the word of the day. Okay. So our affirmation is brought to you by my shirts again. Let me let y'all see it. And then I'll tell you what it says if you can't completely see what it says. My shirt says, let it end, let it hurt, let it heal, and let God. I hope this helps. So that's what the shirt says. And then our word of the day comes to us from Psalms 34:18. And it reads, let us not forget that the Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are broken in spirit. So with that being said, we'll kind of introduce tonight's topic. Initially, we were going to talk about trauma and trauma bonds. But trauma bonding is more of a whole segment by itself. It's a deeper conversation. It aligns very closely with abuse. So I feel like we will probably table trauma bonding to the month of October when we are celebrating and talking in the month of National Domestic Violence Awareness Month. Though October as well is National Breast Cancer Awareness Month. And we'll talk and hopefully get us some great guests on to talk about that work as well. But the trauma bonding part of things that I initially said we will talk about is going to be tabled for tonight. And we will just really talk about trauma, what trauma is, the different types of trauma, and trauma responses. Okay? Is that cool? Can I get some thumbs ups? That's good? Okay, love it. Yes, thank you, Sasha. Yes. All right. So let's get to it. We're just going to jump in. I definitely would love for you all to be interactive as we were last week, so we can just have these really open discussions about what trauma is and the different types of traumas, right? Great. So, what is trauma? What is trauma? Can you guys maybe drop a few nuggets? What is trauma? All right. So the word trauma literally means wound, shock, or injury. It's generally out of our controls. Out of our control. The experience is very stressful. It could be frightening, distressful events, and even difficult to deal with. Okay? Now we'll talk about what are the different types of trauma. So you have indirect traumas, and then you also have direct traumas. I'm going to start with direct traumas just so you all can kind of get a feel for what I am talking about initially. I feel like everybody would kind of know what direct traumas are, but a lot of this will be clinically based, but then we will draw onto your comments and the things that you guys have to add to the conversation. And so don't forget to add your comments. So there are different types of trauma, and I'm going to focus on 3 direct types of trauma. So we have acute trauma, guys. Acute trauma is generally a single extraordinary event that leaves us feeling powerless. It's generally caused by either a severe illness, injury, or a violent assault, car accidents, loss of relationships, loss of jobs, loss of home. And those are those kind of single events. So though it is single, okay, Dolores says when you are afflicted. Many are afflicted are those who are righteous, right, Dolores? So it is when you are afflicted, but it's generally a single extraordinary event, right? It happens, but the trauma sets itself up. And we have to learn how to deal with it. And later on, we will talk a little bit about kind of how to deal with those traumas that we face. Then, hey Nita, hey sister. Then we have chronic trauma. This is a type of trauma that results from varied and multiple traumatic experiences, generally with interpersonal relationships. Now, this can involve like childhood abuse or neglect, and really severe cases of that, right? I have had in my career, and for those of you who don't know me, I am a licensed clinical and forensic social worker. So yes, I am qualified to sit here and talk about these clinical things with you all. Dejanette says a lingering experience when it comes to trauma. And do you mean chronic or acute, or are you referring to trauma in general, D? I would love to know what you mean when you say a lingering experience. So I sit here before you very well qualified to talk about these clinical things that we have brought forth and that we will continue to bring forth. There will be so much time for so many other things, and I don't want to negate the fun that we're going to have on here. But there are so many topics that have been, thank you, D, I got you. There have been so many topics that have come to me, and sometimes in layers. So when it comes like that, I generally, thank you for the hearts, I generally take the time to kind of to weigh when and prioritize how I am going to present things, right? So so acute is your single extraordinary event that leaves you feeling powerless. Chronic is that trauma that results in varied and multiple, that layered up experiences that generally comes from interpersonal relationships with our family and sometimes even our friends. But then the third type of trauma is complex trauma. And it is just exactly and precisely what, hey, Chantel, our roommate, then entered the room. Hey, y'all, all y'all are my roommates. And in general, you can't shake it. Yeah, I agree with that, Dejanette. You can't. It's something that lingers on, and it's something that really just tugs and tugs at your spirit. But complex trauma is the type of trauma that results in prolonged traumatic experiences and events. It goes on for a period of time. And that period of time can be days, weeks, months, and yes, even years, unfortunately. Examples of that is like domestic violence, war, civil unrest. Think about what's going on right now over in Gaza and Israel and all of these places with that unrest that we see all the time, that civil unrest where people live in these areas and this is where they have to live, but yet their communities are stricken with violence and they have to see people get hit with, just the violence that come along with that, and they're witnessing murders and genocide and all of these things that are happening before them, right? So complex trauma is similar to that, right? And even again, domestic violence. When we think about domestic violence, it's more than just the perpetrator and the abuse that's in that, if there are children involved and if there's family members that are invested in the well-being of their loved ones, right? So when you think about that, that trauma becomes so complex that it's not easily swept away. We have to learn how to cope with it even after it has happened to us, so that we are not in this space of bleeding on people who didn't cut us, right? And that's the healing part of everything, okay? Rejection. Rejection is a big one. I think rejection could probably fall in the chronic area where we talk about the abuse that comes from those interpersonal relationships, and it involves abuse and neglect, because it's very rare that in a relationship where there is any form of abuse or any form of neglect, that rejection isn't occurring. You have to reject, it has to be some form of rejection for a person to feel those layers of abuse and neglect. So I absolutely agree with that. All right. So can you guys think of any single events, traumatic events that have occurred to you, or have occurred to someone that have had lasting effects? I think about if you've ever been in a car accident. If you've ever been in a car accident, it's like the very first, if it's ever happened once, or if it happened multiple times, the very first time that it happens to you, you're always traumatically shaken every time you drive the car thereafter, because you're not knowing what to expect. Because when it happened to you the first time, again, it was that single, just all of a sudden event that happened to you, and you don't know how to respond, because in that you're already severely injured, or you're already shaken up because of the side effects of what occurred from that event of trauma. Okay? Good. I see y'all comments. Yes. Okay, we got some people that's agreeing with me. Loss of a loved one. Let's talk about that. Loss of a loved one. I can put that in all three categories. PTSD. Yes, Michelle. PTSD. Let's talk about loss of a loved one really quickly. I think about when a loved one is taken from us unexpectedly. And this is by way of someone inflicting and taking them from this earth, or them just not waking up from taking a nap. That is acute trauma, but it can also be chronic in that it can have that lasting, it's going to have that lasting effect. Now, let's remember one thing about trauma. It affects each event. If you and I are in the same event that could cause trauma, the way that it affects me, it may not affect you the same way. So I want to be very clear about that. And momentarily, I'm going to break that down for you all. But let's be very clear. It's going to affect each of us very differently. Okay? And the reason I say that the loss of a loved one can fall in a acute, chronic, or complex is because it's really based on how long the effect of that trauma lasts. Because it can last days, it can last weeks, it can last months, but it can also last years. When something changes within you as a result of a life's event, and it has traumatically scarred you, it has its layers to where it resides. So I just want to be very clear. That's why it says we all need to understand that my healing process and my grieving journey is not going to be your healing process and your healing journey. So I just really, really want us to keep that in mind when we are working with trying to understand what people are going through around us. It is so unfair to tell somebody just get over something. It's just, that shouldn't even be in our vocabulary when someone has experienced trauma. Anthony is saying that it can last forever. And it does. Because it do, in Dolores Bailey's voice. Because we have to embrace it how we embrace it. But above embracing it, we have to be intentional about addressing the trauma. And we're going to get to kind of like those trauma responses, right? And what we need to do. And it can be triggered at any moment. It can totally be triggered at any moment. Yes, Chantel, that's the truth. So, y'all know I'm not going to bring anything to y'all without bringing some theorists and stuff into the mix, because I don't just wake up and come up with this stuff. And I want us to have foundational, educational interactions when it comes to us doing this, right? So many trauma theorists reminds us that when we talk about trauma, we are referencing what happens in our bodies, our minds, and during and after the traumatic event itself. Let's be very clear. The event is not the trauma in and of itself. Because remember, a moment ago, I just talked about how it affects you, it may not affect me, and vice versa. So that's an element of shock, unexpected wound, injury, because you and I could be in the same car accident, unfortunately, and one thing can happen to one person and one thing can happen to another. But it all happened to us at the same time. That takes me back to, I remember with somebody that I grew up with, and we suffered, our community suffered a very horrific car accident where a couple people were taken and a couple people lived. But that trauma in that was so grand on the community because one, we've lost people. Two, even those that live, they continuously live in a state of why me? Why did I survive? Right? So that's trauma in and of itself. And then the fact that when you wake up out of it, you're here and someone else that you care about is gone. And that can go for anything. And you all know that. Because there are times that, I mean, we grew up in some good times, but we grew up in some tough times. For those of you who know, you know. And we witnessed so many things. And some people are witnesses to those things. And some people are descendants of those things. So the trauma hits different. For the person involved, for the family members involved, for everybody that it hits differently. So I do want us to be mindful that though the traumatic event is tough and it's hard and it's difficult, right? We have to be mindful that it's not the traumatic event that is the trauma. It's what's felt. It's the residual effects of the event that causes the trauma. Right? Survivor's remorse. That's exactly what that is. In one token of what I just said. Survivor's remorse. Amanda says, hey there, just talked about this at work today. It's something to be talked about. Because what we cannot be is dismissive of events that is traumatically taking an overhaul in our life. And we can't, it's not my obligation nor the obligation of anyone else to tell someone how to feel in it. To tell someone, oh, just get over it. To tell someone, oh, you'll be just fine, when you don't know. And even if you're in it, you still don't know. Because how it affects me, it may not ever affect you in that same capacity. So I definitely want us to be mindful of that. So with the direct traumas, guys, the acute, the complex, what is it? Any other things that you guys would like to kind of talk about there before we kind of go on? So it's the acute, the chronic, and the complex. So those are our direct traumas. Those are the things that are happening to us and how they're categorized, whether it's a single event, whether it's an ongoing event, whether it's layered up and it's complicated, like we know things to be complicated, right? So what do? Let me go to some. I see my betrayal by someone you love. Oh man, that is definitely trauma. Now let's go a step further. Where does betrayal by someone you love, where would you say that falls on the types of direct trauma? I say betrayal. If you are betrayed like by a multitude of people that you are pouring into, that you are willing to kind of give a left arm to, and that you've sacrificed things for. I would say for me that portrayal at minimum falls in the chronic and possibly the complex trauma area. And I say that because, right, we've all been in relationship, be it intimate or not, where we feel like we have given our all to someone and that we would have even given more, but then they've come and done things to betray your trust or betray your loyalty. For me, I say that falls into the chronic or even complex things, because what if the person that is betraying you is a family member or your intimate partner, right? Your husband or your wife? Like, how likely are you to just get over that? It can be prolonged. It can show up in your day-to-day when you're trying to be okay and you're saying that you're okay, when all actuality, all you could think about is this betrayal, especially when the betrayal happens and then the person abruptly leaves your life as if nothing has occurred, right? I think that could be at a level where it's prolonged, right? It takes a while for us to get over, because you're left struggling with, how could I have shown up? How could I have done things better when you feel like you've already gave it your complete all? So it certainly can be complex at minimum, but chronic at most, because then it picks away at your esteem. It further develops your insecurities and rejection. It reminds you that though you want to be loyal, or though you have been loyal, that not everyone is going to receive that loyalty in the same type of way, right? So betrayal can certainly, I can see it in any of the categories, because it could be a one-time thing. If many of you are way stronger than I am, it could probably be a one-time thing. With me, I'm a chance giver. Me, I'm a overly loving person. So for me, I can probably take a little bit more, or have in my past taken a little bit more than somebody else can. I love y'all one and done people. Y'all cold-blooded. And I don't mean that with no disrespect. I love one and done people, because that has never been me till recently, and I'm still not one and done. I want to give a chance and a half and done, but I love one and done people. If I have to speak about being, just contrite in an area, that is probably one of my areas of just giving people too many times an opportunity. Sean says that when people try to downplay your feelings, yeah, that can be traumatic, because you know what that does? That leaves us in a constant state of defensiveness. When you just absolutely don't feel heard, and you feel like everything that you do, everything you say is downplayed, that have you in the mirror looking like, what am I doing wrong? What am I saying wrong? Am I going crazy? So I agree, like being in that constant state, yes, very traumatic. Being in that constant state, I'm going to tell y'all, and I know for sure I'm going to end up doing a segment on rejection. And yes, I roll my eyes in the back of my head, and my best friend probably over there cringing at what she think I'm going to say. But that's a topic that I'm going to have to put my all into when I sit and I present it, because I have to be honest about what it has meant for me in my life. And then I also have to be able to convey what it does to people in general. So yes, rejection is hard and very traumatic. Gaslighting, we about to get to that, girl. We about to get to that, okay? So let's go on. Let's go down a little bit. Let's talk about a couple of indirect types of trauma. Okay, so I'm just going to do a couple, and then I'm going to give you guys a story about indirect trauma for me, right? That has plagued my life, my entire life. So one type of indirect trauma is intergenerational trauma. Drop in the chat real quick before I even say it. What is, when you hear intergenerational trauma, what comes to mind? What comes to mind? Intergenerational trauma. Addiction? Any more y'all can think of? Favorites? All right. I like that, Chantel. You got to say something else about that. Addiction, mental health, mental illness diagnoses, poverty. Poverty is a big one. Intergenerational trauma is trauma that is reflected upon you, that is handed down generation after generation. And though it may not affect everybody, and though it may not affect everybody the same, it's in those instances where you got people saying, I'm taking my life back and this won't be me and my children. And you ain't wrong for that. Okay? So, intergenerational trauma, family, yes. Tamika said she was going to say addiction. If you come from, an alcoholic set of parents, or parents that abuse drugs, statistics say that you are more than 50% likely to also become an addict of some sort of substance. Okay? But a big one that I want to talk about with on indirect trauma is vicarious trauma. Hey, sister, you done entered the chat. Yes, domestic violence. Domestic violence is completely and totally and utterly an intergenerational trauma. Want to know why? Because if I'm being beat on and my daughter is watching me, and then she thinks it's okay for her to do, or if my son is watching, then he thinks that it's okay to inflict that type of abuse onto the woman that he's dating. So, yes, ma'am, domestic violence is an intergenerational trauma. But one trauma that I like to talk about a lot, and one that I can articulate very well, is vicarious trauma. Vicarious trauma is secondary yet critical stress that's caused by emotional residue of exposure to traumatic events, stories, and experiences through witnessing fearful events such as violent attacks, murders, accidents, etc. It causes pain or terror, and it is empathetically engaging to the trauma survivor. Yes, Raquel, verbal abuse. And verbal abuse can be vicarious as well. Because though you're not talking to me, you could be, the words that you're saying can cut so deep that it affects me, although you might be talking to someone else. I want to tell you all a story that of vicarious trauma, personal to me, that has plagued my life, my entire life, from a young child. I grew up in public housing, South Side, low end, city of Chicago. And there was a lot going on in the 80s and 90s when I was growing up. There was all type of stuff. It was heavy in gangs. It was heavy in drug sales. It was heavy in gang wars, right? And they were heavy on a lot of things when it comes to respect too. Certain things you ain't gonna do, or there were unfortunate, punitive punitive damages and consequences. So one thing that I witnessed a lot as a kid was like people being jumped on. And there was a term that was called like a pumpkin head in my community, where, you know, head to be this big. And I remember as a kid watching groups of men jump on one person or two people, and whatever the end result was, it was. But to this day, 2024, 46-year-old me, I cannot even watch a Mayweather fight. I cannot watch UFC. I cannot watch it. It was so traumatically damaging that fighting for me I always thought that the end result was going to be something very critical. And that's just the truth of the matter. Many people don't know this story, and many of you guys have been around and probably witnessed the same thing, but it probably hasn't affected you the way that it has affected me. And that is vicarious trauma. To witness something that is so out of, like, it took me out of body. I remember I used to put my hand on my ear because you could hear the licks. I remember I used to close my eyes and put my hand on my ear, and I could still sometimes hear the licks. And I was like, oh my God, when is it going to stop? And it wasn't even me. I wasn't even being jumped on. But I was yearning for the safety of the other person. And as a result, that trauma of that other person have vicariously affected me through all of my years. I don't want to see two grown men on a street fighting. I don't want to see a paid fight. If somebody was to ever say, hey, let's go to Vegas and see Mayweather or whoever the next big thing is, I may go, but my eyes going to be closed the whole time. I may go for the camaraderie. I may go for the experience, but I probably won't look at any of it, right? So that is vicarious trauma for me. That's one. I mean, I have others, but that is one that has plagued me my entire life, from before a teenager to the woman that I am today. Okay? Hey, Sharon, thank you for joining us tonight, roommate. Tamika says she has PTSD from things that she's witnessed growing up in Ida B. Wells as well, but she's getting help now. Okay. Listen, therapy is the name of the game. And you talking to a therapist who has had a therapist more than 3 times over. None of us are exempt to the traumas of this world. None of us are exempt to the traumas of this world. And a lot of times, the only way that we can get over the traumas, complex, acute, chronic, whatever it may be, is by seeking that professional and clinical help to help us get through that. Okay? I'm going to talk about really quickly, guys, the 6 main trauma responses. When you think about trauma responses, tell me what comes to mind. Come on, y'all. Trauma responses. As I said a moment ago, everyone responds to trauma differently. And different types of trauma can elicit various responses to the same individual. And we're going to talk about 6 types of them. Okay? One trauma response is to fight. Right? One trauma response to fight. This involves engaging in a series of attacks and defenses, whether verbally or physically, to confront the threat. It is an instinctive reaction aimed to protecting oneself. Anxiety attacks is definitely a response to trauma. Absolutely, it is. Okay. One of the other trauma responses is, we said fight. What's the next one, y'all? Flight. So the flight response entails escaping or avoiding the threat, both physically and emotionally. This can manifest as running away or using avoidance strategies to distance yourself from the traumatic experience. Have you ever Now, y'all know Cedric the Entertainer and everybody else says, baby, when they say run, black folks don't even ask what's what. We just get to running, right? That's that flight of trying to at least avoid the confrontation or get far away from it as you can. Because otherwise, we will certainly end up in a situation that we don't want to end up in and that can cause lasting and traumatic effects. To freeze is a traumatic response. And this generally occurs when the brain becomes overwhelmed by stimuli, leading to a state of paralysis. Have you ever been engulfed in something that's so traumatic you can't even move? I have. And it is not a good feeling. It causes you to be momentarily paused. And in which the next course of action, it's not even clear to you what you're going to do next. You just froze, you stuck. How someone physically reacts, absolutely weeping. Yes. You can't speak. That's that. When you freeze up, it's real bad, right? Fawn is another traumatic response. FAWN. And this is the psychological reaction where the individual tries to appease the traumatic stimuli in an effort to make it stop. Imagine being kidnapped or something. You know, we see these reels going around right now. I know I just sent my best friend one on where it's like the kidnapper just kind of lets you go because you sitting up thinking everything is a joke. But what you're trying to do is you're trying to distract someone. So you know that it's a bad situation, but you're doing everything in your might to avoid that traumatic event, right? So the response often involves accommodating your perpetrator. Accommodating your perpetrator. Have you ever been in a situation where someone is there to do you harm and you trying to talk your way out of it? And you're wondering, oh my God, what is next? Because all you want to do is distance yourself from it. And the only way you know how to do is try to distract the perpetrator. That's tough. That's real hard. Okay? Block it out. Yeah. Fine, F-I-N-E, is another response to trauma. And this involves denying or downplaying the impact of trauma. Remember we talked about last week? Okay. We can say okay, but are we really okay? But I can understand trying to fan your way out of a situation. Oh, I'm fine. I'm okay. To literally try to attempt to convince yourself that you are okay, even when you're not. Okay? So being fine when you're not fine is a trauma response. And then being faint. The faint response refers to fainting or losing consciousness in response to the traumatic sight or event, in a physical reaction triggered by a sudden drop in the heart rate. Yeah. Some stories I want to tell you all, I just have to figure out how I can. But there have been moments where I have been in faint situations, and I'm really trying to find a way to get my way out, but I'm almost really losing sight of even where I'm at in the circumstance, because it's like I need to detach. I don't want to detach, but I need to detach, right? All right. So we'll have a very brief discussion, guys, on the appropriate responses to trauma. So there's a pioneering neuroscientist. Yeah, we getting scientific, y'all. Neuroscientist, his name is Dr. Bruce Perry, and he's a neuroscientist in the field of trauma. And he teaches us, for us to reach the traumatic brain and to be able to heal in the wake of adversities and the traumatic events, we need to do three things. we need to do three things. We need to regulate, we need to relate, and we need to reason. And with regulating, relating, and reasoning, it probably would lead to us to begin to heal in our traumatic states of being. So let's talk about regulating. For us to regulate, we must calm the fight. We must calm it down. We must calm the fight, the flight, and the freeze response. We have to calm it down. And we must offer soothing comfort and reassurance that you can get through the trauma. So though we are traumatized, remember, on different levels, in different phases, it affects all of us differently, we still have the right to heal from the trauma that has been inflicted upon us. So one thing is to do is to regulate oneself by calming down that fight, flight, fawn, freeze, all those responses by offering up soothing and reassuring gestures that can help us get through the trauma we are experiencing or have experienced. With relating, we must connect with the affected parties. And this is extremely important, y'all. This is so important because we must relate to the parties by empathizing and validating a person's feelings so that they feel seen, heard, and understood. This is where I go to that whole get over it thing. It's been 20 years. We ought to stop that mess there. There is no timeline on grief. There is no timeline on trauma. There's no timeline on traumatic responses. Someone just said a moment ago how you can be triggered in a moment of something that it can simply be a smell. It can simply be growing up where I grew up in, it could be a sound. And it doesn't have to be the sound that we think it to be, because that's where the traumatic experience lies. But it is the sound of something that's familiar because it scared the living daylights out of you. And every time you hear it, it's there. It lives with you. You have to own it. But even in owning it, you have to be able to relate and connect to it in a way that is empathizing, even if it wasn't your experience, or even if it's yourself. You have to be able to know, empathize, give yourself grace, validate yourself, and let yourself be heard, seen, and understood in your trauma. And your therapist is going to tell you that. Okay? And then, last but certainly not least, we have to reason. We must be the voice of reason so that the affected person feels supported when they choose to reflect, when they're trying to learn from, when they simply remember the event that causes them this traumatic stress. And be a voice of reason that offers that continued assurance for someone being willing and able to articulate their experienced trauma. Right? Set boundaries with yourself. Sister, we talked about boundaries. I can't talk about boundaries no more, and I'm kidding. We talked about boundaries real good last week or week before last. I think it was last week. Yes, but you have to set those boundaries for yourself. I absolutely agree. So, we're moving on to our closing segment, guys. You guys have been great. I love this for us. So I want to invite my roommates. I want to invite you all on Instagram and Facebook. I want to invite you all to close us out with any final thoughts on trauma, types of trauma, trauma responses. Any takers at all before I give you all my closing remarks. Dejanette says we need a part 2. Well, D, I'm not sure if you joined us when we first started, but I did mention that initially this show was going to be about trauma and trauma bonding. But when I got to studying, I realized that trauma bonding is more aligned with abuse and abusive relationships. So I really wanted to kind of keep us on this track of trauma, what it is, what causes it, and all of that. But we certainly can explore this at any time in the future, right? So thank you. Yes, a part 2 is definitely good. Trauma is not always physical. You're right. Trauma is not always physical. It's not. Trauma is most likely emotional, and then it's probably behind emotional, it's psychological. It's psychological because you're really trying to figure out what is happening to me in this moment. And earlier on, Tanya, we did talk about how trauma is it generally involves like injury or, very maybe aggressive acts of violence, maybe even murder or shootings and things like that. So you're right. It's not always physical, because though that may happen to someone physical, it also have lasting and long emotional and psychological traumatic effects on those who have to help and deal with and focus in that trauma after it occurs. So I agree with that. So in closing, beautiful roommates, I want you guys to remember this. Understanding trauma responses and trauma in and of itself can help you and help us recognize and validate our own reactions to trauma. It is important to note that no response is inherently right or wrong, and that all trauma responses are valid. I'll repeat that. Understanding trauma responses can help us recognize and validate our own reactions to the trauma. It is important to note that no response is inherently right or wrong, as all trauma responses are valid. Thank you guys for a successful episode 4. I appreciate you all. I thank you for joining me. And I look forward to what lies ahead. Good night. Bye, roommates.